In today's video, I wanted to compare 6 new games in rasterization performance between the RTX 3080 Ti and RX 7900 XTX, which I have manually overclocked. We'll take a look at 1440p and 4K, and I'm also using the latest NVIDIA drivers, and I'm using the AMD preview drivers 23.40.1.10. Let's not waste any time and dive straight into it. We're gonna begin with Dead Space Remake at 4K, and here I'm showing the settings for both GPUs with the 3080 Ti on the left and 7900 XTX on the right. We're essentially maxing out all the settings, but not turning ray traced ambient occlusion on. Now, the way I did this benchmark was I did this mission where you have to calibrate the guns outside the spaceship to protect from the falling asteroids, and I chose this area in particular because it's more demanding than the interior areas, but it also makes it a bit more convenient for me to keep both footages as close to one another as possible. Now, the numbers you're seeing below is essentially the numbers I took at the end of the benchmark for each GPU. So you're seeing the 3080 Ti's average FPS at 65 and the 7900 XTX's averages at 91 FPS. So 140% relative performance of the 3080 Ti. So pretty nice advantage there. And for 1% lows, we have 44 FPS on the 3080 Ti and 61 FPS on the 7900 XTX, which equals the 138% relative performance of the 3080 Ti on the 7900 XTX. There's way too many X's, but it is what it is. But yeah, anyway, instead, to keep the video from being an hour long, I'm going to be editing the footage of the benchmark because we have 6 games to look at and 2 resolutions per game, right? So that's the deal. Also, this game, it does do shader caching in the beginning, but it's a freaking mess. If you play the game right after a driver update or a new driver install, it stutters like crazy. It was pretty much unplayable until I played for a little while, and then it was okay. So I have no idea. I wish they had fixed the game because it's a really good game. But anyway, I don't want to digress. This is our 1440p settings here, so it's essentially the same exact settings but at 1440p. So TAA, high, ultra, the ultra preset, okay? And then now we're getting some solid performance from both GPUs. High refresh rate performance, okay? We have 129 FPS on the averages for the 3080 Ti and 174 FPS for the 7900 XTX, with 1% lows at 80 FPS on the 3080 Ti and at 107 FPS for the 7900 XTX. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the 7900 XTX is being CPU limited, as you can see, even with the 7800X 3D. As a matter of fact, I was going to use my Ryzen 5900X PC to do this comparison, but on this game and the next one, I ran into CPU limitations at 1440p, so I kind of went the extra mile and went with the 7800X 3D. But anyway, we got that around 135% relative performance of the 3080 Ti, pretty much on the averages and 1% lows. Kind of what we expected. And that is Resident Evil 4 Remake, and here you can see my PC setup, which shows on the game's menu, also the driver, for transparency's sake. And here we'll be going through the settings. There's way too many settings on Resident Evil, but here they are. They're essentially maxed out except for the ray traced reflections, which actually they're not that great. The ray tracing is pretty underwhelming in this game. But essentially, I did a run from the very beginning, so a brand new game, all the way to the point where you fight the first enemy. So we go into the house, see the guy, we watch the cinematic, then go down in the basement, then the guy comes down, we shoot him, and then that's pretty much where I ended the benchmark. So it's about 7 or 8 minutes of gameplay. And then the numbers for this particular run is 84 FPS for the 3080 Ti on the averages and 134 FPS for the 7900 XTX, with 60 FPS on the 1% lows for the 3080 Ti and 96 FPS for the 1% lows on the 7900 XTX, which leads to 160% relative performance of the 3080 Ti. So that's a really nice performance bump right there. And that's at 4K native. So I do really like the RE engine. It's a pretty good engine. I'm actually can't wait for Dragon's Dogma 2, which is supposed to run on the same engine. So that is exciting. But yeah, this is definitely where the 7900 XTX pulls away more than what you'd normally see between these two GPUs when you compare them. Normally, you'd see the 7900 XTX have around a 30 to 40% advantage over the 3080 Ti. Well, here we're seeing pretty much almost double that. So that is quite impressive for this game. Now here's our 1440p settings, so it's still the same exact settings, but 1440p. Again, way too many settings in this game, but that's a good thing. Now, unlike Dead Space, this game was actually way smoother in the beginning. However, I did run into a couple of little stutters at the very beginning, so I don't know if the game still caches shaders as you play, but I mean, eventually it was very smooth. I mean, Capcom's RE engine, I do like it a lot. The performance is actually really good on it, and it's quite flexible. Again, about Dragon's Dogma, which I mentioned earlier, I'm very excited for the game to begin with, but it's actually also going to be the first NVIDIA-sponsored Capcom RE engine game, as far as I'm aware. Usually they always partner with AMD. So I'm actually curious to see how that changes things, right? Because RE engine games usually run really well on AMD. As you can see here, the 7900 XTX is almost 160% relative performance of the 3080 Ti on the averages and 1% lows. So that is really good. Normally you'd see around 30% or 40. So this is really good. Now, one thing I was surprised about with the 3080 Ti, actually at 4K, I was actually kind of curious if it would run into any VRAM issues, but it didn't. As you've seen, the 1% lows, 1440p and 4K, they scale the same. We had 160% basically. Now, if there had been any VRAM issues, that performance would be a lot worse, especially the 1% lows would be a lot worse, for sure. So now we go into Hogwarts Legacy at 4K, and we have all the settings maxed out, except for the ray tracing. And we're not going to use any upscaling in this video except for one game. But here we're running 4K native, and I made a Hogwarts Legacy deep dive video comparing all four of my GPUs, and I'm essentially doing the same path. Essentially, we're going into Hogsmeade, we walk up to the stairs and then kind of do a little loop around, and then I take the readings at the end. So basically, for the 3080 Ti, we have 56 FPS on the averages, with the 7900 XTX, 78 FPS on the averages. And then on the 1% lows for the 3080 Ti, we have 32 FPS, which is not great. And on the 7900 XTX, we have 58 FPS on the 1% lows, which is actually pretty good. And when we add all this up, we have 139% relative performance of the 3080 Ti for the 7900 XTX. And on the 1% lows, a massive 181% over the 3080 Ti. So that is a pretty big gap. However, got to keep in mind that this game is poorly optimized on the CPU front, and especially in Hogsmeade, that's like the worst area to be in. So it's not great on either, but clearly the 7900 XTX pulls ahead, much better 1% lows in this particular case. Anyway, let's check out 1440p now. And again, it's the same ultra settings, but with ray tracing disabled, obviously. It's a real shame that games like Hogwarts Legacy, Dead Space, and Jedi Survivor are just stuck with these bad CPU performance issues where it just sucks because all these games are so good. I loved all these games, and they're probably going to be like this forever, unfortunately. But anyway, I'm hoping that Unreal Engine 5 will be better, and based off what I'm seeing, it's actually much better as far as the stuttering thing goes. It's 90% better. It's not perfect, there's still some issues, but anyway. Let's look at the numbers then. For the 3080 Ti at 1440p, we have 102 FPS on the averages and 126 FPS for the 7900 XTX, which, if you pay close attention, is kind of CPU bound here. On the 1% lows, we have 51 FPS on the 3080 Ti, which isn't great, and then 73 FPS on the 7900 XTX, which again is not great because we have a CPU demanding area and we're kind of running CPU bound here because GPUs are dropping below 99 regularly, hitting the 70s in some cases, so not great. Regardless, that leads to 125% advantage for the 7900 XTX on the averages and 143% on the 1% lows for the relative performance of the 3080 Ti. Good stuff. Next game is Jusant, which is one of the most delightful games I've played. I pretty much end up beating this in one sitting. So this is kind of in the middle of the game, this area here, but it's a climbing game with some pretty good music and just chill vibes over. You should definitely check it out if you have Game Pass. It's a very cool game. But anyway, it's an Unreal Engine 5 game, and we're running it at 4K here, and I would say is the best example of Lumen, for sure. I mean, the lighting in this game is absolutely gorgeous. There's some interior areas where light pours in from like windows and cracks, and then there's like plants and animals that glow, and just the way the lighting reacts in this game is absolutely gorgeous. I love good lighting in a game. Actually, funny thing, I had some people say, oh, it looks like a PlayStation 2 game. I don't know where these people come from. It's like if the game is stylized in any way, then it's like a PS2 game. Clearly it doesn't. It's a very highly detailed game where it matters. But anyway, I do like this game. I think it looks great and it's fun to play. It's not a very challenging game, right? You do have like a stamina management system, but it's nothing crazy, right? But anyway, let's look at the performance here. For the averages at 4K native, we have 51 FPS on the 3080 Ti, and on the 7900 XTX, we have 68 FPS. For the 1% lows, we have 38 FPS on the 3080 Ti, which isn't great, and on the 7900 XTX, we have 55 FPS, which is actually much better. And this will be our 1440p run, which is, I would say, runs great on both, but even on the 3080 Ti, it runs. Now, this game does have DLSS, does have FSR, does have TSR, the Unreal Engine 5 temporal upscaler, which actually works really well. I do like it quite a lot, actually. But anyway, let's look at the numbers. We're doing the same run like the previous games, and we have 91 FPS on the averages for the 3080 Ti and 126 FPS for the averages on the 7900 XTX. And then we have 65 FPS on the 1% lows for the 3080 Ti and 96 FPS for the 1% lows on the 7900 XTX, which equals to 138% relative performance of the 3080 Ti for the averages and 148% on the 1% lows. So pretty nice bump here and very comparable to the 4K, right? So we're seeing that 30 to 40% performance advantage of the 7900 XTX here over the 3080 Ti. But anyway, let's move on to another Unreal Engine 5 game that turned out to be great. Robocop Rogue City. We're running the game here at 4K. We've maxed out every setting, including the Lumen high quality reflections as well here. So 4K native. No, it's not 4K native. I had to actually use DLSS quality and FSR here because both GPUs would be below 60 and I kind of want it to be around 60ish FPS, okay? So I used DLSS and FSR quality just for this game here. And we're getting some pretty good performance actually on both. We have 62 FPS on the averages for the 3080 Ti and 82 FPS for the averages on the 7900 XTX, with 46 FPS on the 1% lows, so it's a little bit not great, but not too bad. And then we have 65 FPS for the 1% lows on the 7900 XTX, which is actually pretty good. And again, just like with Jusant, we're seeing that same 132% relative performance of the 3080 Ti on the averages and 141% on the 1% low. So very comparable to Jusant here, the gap between the two. So yeah, I don't know. It's this game turned out great, and again, Unreal Engine 5 seems to be much better than Unreal Engine 4 as far as these shader caching stutters, although there still is some traversal stutters because I've been able to replicate it on the same areas over and over again. So hopefully they can fix that. But while we wait for them to fix that, let's check out 1440p for Robocop Rogue City. And here we're going to get much better performance here. Obviously we're above 60 FPS, and it's kind of comparable to what we were getting with DLSS and FSR quality previously to some degree at 4K, right? So for the 3080 Ti, we have 67 FPS on the averages, and we have 90 FPS for the 7900 XTX averages. And on the 1% lows, we have 48 FPS for the 3080 Ti, so that's actually very comparable to the 4K numbers, and 71 FPS for the 7900 XTX on the 1% lows, which leads to about a 30% relative performance of the 3080 Ti for the 7900 XTX. So again, we're seeing that 30 to 40% performance advantage for the 7900 XTX again, which is, I would say, around the average, right? Now you're going to get titles where it's going to be more than that, then you're going to get titles where it might be less than that, but I would say the 30-ish% is expected. The next and last game then will be Ratchet and Clank, one of my favorites. I did a deep dive on this game, but this is a different run. All these benchmarks, actually, I did brand new, fresh for both of these cards, just for this video, okay? And this is a different area, like I mentioned. Not a lot of fighting here, but it's a lot of rail grinding, so a lot of loading and unloading here. And if we look at the numbers, we have 81 FPS on the averages for the 3080 Ti and 106 FPS on the averages for the 7900 XTX, with 46 FPS on the 1% lows for the 3080 Ti, so that is not great. It's almost half. And then we have 65 FPS for the 1% lows on the 7900 XTX. And again, we see that same 131% relative performance over the 3080 Ti on the averages, and then 141% on the 1% lows. So yeah, we're going to check out 1440p next, and that'll be the last part of this video. But I don't know, I would like to get your guys' opinion if you like this type of video more. Obviously, it took me a lot more time to put this together than my previous videos. I did enjoy it, but I don't know if this is if it's appealing at all for me to just cite numbers, or if it's better to just leave them on the screen. Please let me know. I'm just kind of trying different things. See what works and see what doesn't, and kind of learn and grow from it. So that's kind of the goal here. But anyway, I hope you guys did like this. And again, we're seeing some solid performance here for the 7900 XTX over the 3080 Ti. Kind of what we expected to see. Nothing crazy. Although on Resident Evil 4, we've seen a massive advantage for the 7900 XTX over the 3080 Ti. But anyway, guys, if you did like this, give it a like. I would highly appreciate it. And if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. But leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Leave your suggestions. I would love to read them and hear what you guys think. I do appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great day. Until next time, bye-bye.
We are fast approaching the main drill.
Wow, it's been my lifelong lifelong dream to operate a drill 100 times bigger than me.
Really? That is very specific.
Specific goals are achievable goals.